Immaculate is directed by Michael Mohan and stars Sydney Sweeney, among others. And in this story, it deals with a young nun who gets invited to a convent in Italy, where she pretty much has to get her final vows going and everything to give herself to the church or to the convent. Sorry. And along the way, she ends up discovering that she becomes pregnant, and it's what's described as a miracle, as she gets held as like the new version of the Virgin Mary. And along the way, she starts to discover some really disturbing stuff around the area. And if you've seen from the trailers, it gets into some deeper, disturbing stuff that the movie unravels with. And I'll leave it there. Now, here's a little backstory. Now, I was actually kind of curious about this movie from seeing the trailers for it, because it seems like we've been on this kind of trend of seeing these nun type of religious horror films that have come out in the last few years, especially with the Nun and Nun 2 and the Conjuring franchise, and also with last year when we had the Pope's Exorcist and things like that. And so movies that deal with like the horror movies that deal with like the whole religious angles and stuff, or different themes that are about faith and everything, they can be hit and miss from what I've heard with some movies. And apparently this was also something that was big in the 70s or in the back in the day, where we had a lot of different what they called nunsploitation films, and basically dealing with these movies that deal with faith and everything. They can be pretty disturbing and can be controversial depending on how they come out and everything. Because from what I also heard, there were some movies back then that were pretty controversial that still to this day haven't really been released, especially if a film that, I'm just giving an example of a movie like the Devils that came out from the 70s that was pretty disturbing at its time. But going into this one, it got me curious, but at the same time, I was just going with open expectations with it, because seeing how 2024 hasn't been on a good start with horror films that start out with Night Swim and then Imaginary, but being really surprised with the movie I watched the other day called Late Night with the Devil. It was pretty interesting how this movie got released the same time that movie did, in that both movies were dealing with essentially, religious type of themes and stuff like that. And so in a way, it kind of makes itself as a double feature too, because I'm not going to spoil anything, but there's something in this film that actually has quite similarities to certain scenes that happen in that other film as well. But upon seeing the film, I can say that, well, this was definitely quite a movie to watch. That definitely will have will definitely be either divisive or really get people to talk about, especially toward the ending. And I am not going to go at all into what happens at the end, but I'll say that this is a decent film. Could have been a lot better into a lot of extent as far as a lot of stuff I'll get into later. But to get my pros out of the way, I thought Sydney Sweeney was really good in this. I'm not really familiar with her as an actress. Like I've heard about her in other projects she's been in, especially in Euphoria and The White Lotus and things like that. But my only introduction to her was actually surprisingly with Madam Web. And the less said about that movie, the better. But from what I've gathered, from what I've heard, is that she is a very talented actress, and and hearing her, doing good performances in the shows that I mentioned, and also I heard she in movies like Anyone But You. It shows that she is definitely, getting more into the mainstream these days and becoming a more up and coming actress in her own right. And so there's more stuff that I may check out eventually down the line with her in it. But so far, this is only the second film I've seen her in. And I thought that she did terrific. I thought she really hold her ground in playing that very innocent type of nun that has a really tragic backstory that really comes into play with how the convent really sees her and everything about what her devotion to faith is and everything like that. And she really pulls it around, and she definitely goes for it, especially in the scenes where she really gets really scared. And I'm not going to go into spoilers, but especially toward the end when she really goes for it, that's like on top tier level. She reminds me in a good way of the way that she goes in that very, on that kind of level, like Florence Pugh's performance in Midsummer, in that it feels very raw and gritty on a very grounded level, so to speak, on the way that she goes for it on the emotional level. So I'll leave it at there. But she was great, and then the rest of the cast are great too, but I do have a problem with the rest of the characters that come into play, because there's really not... This movie does kind of have like a very thin layered script that doesn't really give enough material to really showcase much of how the other characters play out, so because we barely even know who the rest of them are as the movie unfolds. So that was one of my issues, but the performances I thought were still great. I mean, there's not really anyone else that really sticks out other than the main priest, and then maybe the other girl that's following along with her and trying to have all this skepticism what's going on and stuff. But other than that, I mean, it doesn't really seem like that they don't really have. This is kind of getting more of my cons later, but the movie does feel very hollow as far as characterization, and it has a very very thinly layered script where you're not really familiar with a lot of the characters in the movie that much. But with that being said, though, the production design, especially the cinematography, it really gives that very isolated feel with it being, stuck in this convent for most of the film and stuff. And it makes you feel like you're very, claustrophobic in that sense of, you can't, basically she can't go anywhere. And there's a lot of interesting stuff that they really, could have some really good world building with the way that the movie plays out, where in a way, and this is kind of a good comparison I could see it as, but it's like, it reminds me a little bit of A Cure for Wellness, in that there's that very, skeleton in the closets kind of thing happening with certain things in the convent, and then you also have some people that are not really what they say who they are and stuff, and so there's that. But I think that this would make like a good, this is instead of it being taking place in a insane asylum, it's actually instead of basically an Italian convent. And so there's that. But it really puts me in the kind of atmosphere that I really felt like, you felt the mood, the way it was going and stuff. But also, this movie gets really gory as hell, too, especially with a lot of scenes that, let's just say that there's a tongue that gets cut out. There's something that happens toward the end I won't spoil. And I was actually really surprised they got away with it. There's just a lot of stuff in this. There's just a lot of stuff that happens in this that I was just really surprised they got away with. It's really good to see that movies that are more, I don't want to say, I guess this is one more of those independently type movies. Like, these more lower grade type movies are still able to get away with practical effects that still, can get away with showcasing a lot of brutality and good special effects than what we see today in some other horror films. So I give them a lot of credit for that. But then also, the score is good, and then you also have the way that it really plays into the ending is what really saves it a lot, especially when I didn't really expect it to go on that kind of level where they went for it. And I'll leave it there because that really put me on my jaw just dropping. I kind of had a similar reaction like I did with Late Night with the Devil, but on a different kind of level with this one. This one was really disturbing with the end of it, and it really got me. But if I have to get into my cons now, I will say that one of the things that really does hold the movie back is definitely the pacing. It is a slow burn film that does take its time, and while I was getting interested, especially when we get into some stuff in the midpoint in the film, it does seem like it still takes a while to actually get there at that point, and it still kind of slows some things down here and there where, there's instances where Sydney Sweeney's character would be coming across this elderly woman a couple times that did kind of feel repetitive. And there's also some things that, because this is also kind of a hollow script, they don't really go into a whole lot of detail, a lot of what's really going on with a lot of the characters and what their motivation is and stuff. To go into much deeper backstory or to much deeper development. And also some of the other sisters, the other nuns that are in the film, they don't really get to have much development as far as really getting attached to really care that much. And they also set up something that happens where they're taking care of these elderly nuns during their last days and everything, but it really seems like they could have spent more time with that, as we don't really get to do much with it, especially as the way the plot unfolds. And then on top of that, there's things that I feel like they could have really established more with at least setting up stuff on the outside world, so to speak. And I get that was probably meant to be on the ambiguous level, but it just really seemed like there's more they could have touched base on to really showcase more of what's really going on with all the weird, sketchy stuff that's happening inside. But that's just really more of just the way that the movie was playing into going on just at 90 minutes. So I know you can just go along with doing so much during that time period, but it really feels like the script just needed a little bit more, develop a lot more stuff than what we could have got into the movie. So there's that. But also, it just seems like there were also some jump scares that come out here and there that do feel a little kind of gotcha at times, and that while some of them can be a little bit, unpredictable. Other times it does feel like, I can tell when they're coming and things. And also, even from the beginning, I could tell where the plot was going, and it does kind of become predictable as it goes along. And it's only really saved by that final twist at the end that really got me. But the rest of it seems like it was really getting onto something that I kind of already knew and didn't really have any kind of surprise when certain things happen toward the end of it, when it gets to the final climax. And so, with that being said, this still was a decent film that I still would recommend if you're checking out like maybe like a early matinee or something, or maybe renting it when it comes out, and especially with the ending itself. And so with that, I'm going to give the movie an extremely high average Joe on the Film Freaks meter. So for those of you who have also seen Immaculate, let me know in the comments what you thought about it. And thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next review. I'll see you later.